Good afternoon. This is Jeff Hyman, and I look forward to getting started right on time in about 7 minutes. I want to do a quick audio and video test. If you could type in the chat box, I'd really appreciate it. Let me know if you can hear and see me okay. We'll get started in about 7 minutes. Hello, everyone. This is Jeff. We are going to start in about 3 minutes or so. A lot of people registered for this event, so I want to give everyone a chance to just get signed in. So in the meantime, type in the chat box where you are, where you're located. I know you're at home. I already know that, but let me know where your home is, and we'll get started shortly. Okay, well, we have a ridiculously huge turnout for this session. I guess I should be careful what I wish for. Maybe because everyone's working at home, like I am, it's a little bit easier to attend. Well, I appreciate you making the time. I think you're going to find this to be an extraordinary, useful session. I will tell you a couple things up front. Let's do some housekeeping. If for whatever reason we lose video because the internet is being so strained, then I will get right back on. I will pick up where we left off. So just know that up front. Also, I'm going to give you my contact info later at the end. So if you need to follow up with me on anything specifically, you want to talk about specific questions in your situation, I'm happy to do that as well. But I will stay on for Q&A. So as long as you want to stay on, we can go all night if you want. I got absolutely nowhere else to go, as I'm sure you know. So we can do Q&A. Last night we stayed on for, I don't know, a couple hours. It was a different topic, but I'm happy to do that. So before we get started, let me give you a little caution because I think this is going to be a bit different than some of these sessions that you might have attended in the past. This will be a very, very candid discussion. My intention is not to be overly sobering or draconian, but I do want to have some really straight, no BS conversation, including addressing your questions. So please understand that up front. That's probably not for everybody. But if you lead an organization, if you lead a department, if you lead an investment fund, then you deserve to hear this. I would say that you probably need to hear this. And with all that said, why don't we get started? So again, I'm Jeff Hyman. I'm based here in Chicago at home, and you're in the right place. If you've got some very tough decisions to make around your business, and I would tell you that you probably do. If you don't know which assumptions to use to make those decisions, we're going to talk about that as well. If you're just kind of feeling stuck and you're unsure, what do I do next? What do I do first? I've never been through a recession, or maybe just the muscle memory, because we haven't been through a recession in 12 years, which is a long period of time. It's really easy to forget so many of those unpleasant memories that I suspect we're soon going to be experiencing. And so if you're in the right place, if those things are up your alley, and I want to make sure, again, you can hear and see me okay. So do me a favor one last time, type in the chat box if you can hear me, if you can see me, and then we're going to get started right away. I don't have a cough, but I do get dry, so I'm going to stay properly hydrated as we go. And yep, everyone can hear me. Great. Let's go. So imagine this picture. This is my image for you. And that is to sleep soundly, knowing that you have a plan in place. Now, for some of you, that is probably going to be a tall order, but that's my goal. And over the next hour, I'm going to make sure that we do that. You can absolutely do this. I've done it. I'm working with other CEOs and leaders who are doing it, but I can tell you that it's going to take a very different approach than what you might be used to. And I call that wartime leadership. So in the next hour, we're going to talk about how to create your war plan for your business, for your department, maybe for all your companies if you're in private equity or venture capital. And we're going to talk about the decisions that are right in front of your face that you need to make and how to make them. We're also going to talk about how do you talk with your team. Because even if you have seen this movie before, well, look, none of us have seen this exact movie before, but even if you've been through a difficult time period before, I am sure there's people on your team, in your company, that haven't. So how you're going to communicate with them is important. And I'm also going to share with you the biggest mistakes that I see people make. I've been through 3 recessions. That's probably the best part about being old, is I have a little bit of experience, not much. And I've seen a lot of people make a lot of mistakes that I want to help you avoid. So 60 seconds on me, just to get it out of the way. I've led 4 companies, 3 of which during recessions. I've been an executive recruiter advising CEOs and companies for 25 years. I've recruited over 3,000 people. So I've been in and around organizations. And even though we're not going to specifically focus on recruiting tonight, maybe just a tiny bit, I've seen a lot of these situations. And I teach at Kellogg Business School here in Chicago. So with all that said, and that's a bit about me, let's talk about where we are sitting here right now today. Clearly, our world has changed overnight, specifically in the past 20 days. Not only do we have this monumental health crisis, which I'm not going to belabor on this call, but obviously that has to come first, right? We don't have a business or society if we don't have health. That's all we have. But it's causing this economic crisis. So we now have two situations to deal with at the same time. And that's the one we're going to focus on tonight, specifically how it's going to impact your company, your department, maybe a little bit about your career. I know you've been paying attention, so you know that the stock market has experienced the fastest decline in its history, which is remarkable. But that's the stock market, and it's just the stock market. It's only money, right? The problem is the stock market is super smart, and the stock market thinks ahead 3, 6, 12 months to anticipate what's going to happen, and that reflects in the stock market today. So what you could think of is that you're looking at the future. You're looking at the stock market, and this is just now starting to happen, even though in the stock market it's already happened, but it's giving us a huge piece of information. So that tells us we have one priority over the near term, and we'll talk about how long the near term is, and that is to survive the imminent existential threat that's right in front of our face. And by existential, I mean the existence of your company, of your business, and yeah, of your job too. So put simply, all those plans you had until 20 days ago, all those priorities, all the things that were on your plate, all the new products you were developing, all those things fade into the background. They go to the back burner. And what comes forward is just one priority, which is how to live to fight another day. And that's what wartime leadership is all about. That's the essence of it. Type in the chat box if that makes sense to you so far. Just type the word yes, and we will keep going. We're going to talk about wartime leadership, and I'm going to give you a step-by-step, very actionable framework. Now, I've carved out an hour for this. It's the first time I've done this session. I've been putting it together over the past 48 hours without sleep. So if we go a little bit over an hour, I kind of assume you have nowhere to go. And then we're going to do Q&A for as long as you want. Now, we talked about the stock market. This was the headline in the New York Times Online a couple hours ago. And there's just so many implications of it that it's hard to get one's mind around it. First of all, 6 million people lost their job this week. 6.6 million people. That's in addition to 3.3 million people last week. 10 million people, I can do that math, have lost their jobs in the past 2 weeks. If you're one of them, I'm sorry. We've never seen anything like this, ever. This is like 10 times the previous record of like 600,000 in a week. The question is this the tip of the iceberg, or is this just a couple of week blip? I implore you to open your mind to the possibility that as a wartime leader, you need to assume and plan for the worst and hope for the best. I hope for the best. I'm an optimist. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm an American, but I also can't deny this data that's looking at me right in the face. It was announced this morning at 7:30 a.m. here in Chicago. Our Treasury Secretary is telling us that the unemployment rate could get to 20%. Kansas City Fed thinks it could be 35%. It's certainly going to rival the Great Depression. The Great Depression, the ones our grandparents lived through, and by the way, and survived. That's what we're looking at. It's looking at us right in the face. Now, I don't say this to scare you or alarm you. I say this because the sooner you can get your arms around the situation, the sooner you can say, okay, what do we do? What is shocking to me, as I've been talking to dozens of CEOs, clients, and otherwise over the past few weeks, is there are still a lot of people that aren't getting with the program yet. It's only been 20 days. It's not going to be that bad. Yes, unfortunately, many people are going to perish over the next 30 days, but the economy will bounce right back. And I even thought that for a few days. But as I've dug through the numbers and studied it and looked at it and analyzed it and listened to people way smarter than me, the conclusion I've come to is that we can hope for that. We can hope for a V-shaped recovery starting at the end of April, when the president gives us the all clear to leave our homes and go back to restaurants and all this stuff, which I don't think is going to happen. The question is, are you going to bet your company on it? Are you going to bet your department on it? And I don't think it's a safe bet. So the sooner we can start to get our arms around the situation, the sooner we can start to act on it. The reason for this is that it's not just these job losses. 10 million people in 2 weeks, as tragic as that is, and as unbelievable as that is, has domino effects, domino implications. So as people lose their job, they don't buy cars. They don't buy homes. They don't go out to eat, which means that those businesses get affected, which means their vendors get affected, and so on and so on. It is a domino chain. The dominoes are just now starting to fall. As bad and ugly as it is, I fear it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. I hope I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, and I'm a neurotic guy from New York, so if I'm wrong, great. The question is, are you going to bet your company on it? Based on what I've seen in 3 previous recessions, there are some decent assumptions we can make about what's going to happen to your business and how you can plan for that. And that's the purpose of this session. I kind of think about it as a tsunami that's coming. The water's still pretty tranquil, or at least it was till a couple days ago, but it's out there and it's coming. There's a health crisis, a health tsunami coming, and I can't say how much I feel for people that are directly impacted. I haven't been yet. But economically, there's another tsunami coming. And this one you actually can do something about and can prepare for, just as you're locked in your home, just as you're washing your hands, just as you're doing as the government instructs on the health crisis. There are things proactively you can do on the economic crisis. The good news is we're going to get past this, right? We always do. That's the American way. We have to believe. We do. We will get past this. There's no question. But companies and industries will be reshaped and remade over the coming weeks and months. And hope is not a strategy. So you can hide. You can put your head in the sand. You can watch Netflix. There's a lot of content to watch. Sometimes I wonder if by the time this is all done, someone will have watched all the content on Netflix. I guess theoretically that's possible. Or you can win. And that means rethinking, reorienting your thinking to redefine win. I would submit that we're going to look back at this period and just saying surviving. And by that, I don't mean physically. I mean your business surviving, your business surviving is going to be a win. That's kind of all you can ask. And the sooner you get your arms around that, the sooner you can act. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. There's opportunity out there. There are companies that have doubled, tripled, quadrupled, 20x, 100x in size in days, right? So it's less about the whole world falling apart, and it's more about a migration, a value migration. Jobs are moving. Hotels are closing. Restaurants and bars are closing. Grocery stores and Home Depot and online therapy are growing, right? So it's a migration. There's always opportunity. The challenge is to find it. The only way to do that is having a plan. And it's really easy to get panicked. And that's what happened when I lived in Silicon Valley during the dot-com boom and bust, and saw a lot of people panic. It doesn't do anything. Wasted time and energy. If you haven't been through this before, unfortunately, my best advice is that you got to fake it till you make it, right? This is a battlefield promotion. You're being made into a wartime general, just as our president has been made into a wartime president. And we all have to step up. And that may mean that you got to fake it till you make it. The good news is you don't need to outrun everyone. You don't need to even outrun the bear. You just need to outrun the guy behind you, right? So I'm not looking for perfection. This is not going to happen. But you can't suffer from inaction and do nothing. The bear will get you. So let's talk about your business now. Probably the best illustration I can use is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or Maslow's triangle. And in case you've forgotten, since studying Psychology 101 in college, just as a refresher, we start with the things that we need, right? Air, water, food, clothing. Then we move to physical safety, health, security. Then we move to love and, being all you can be, and all these things up the pyramid. In times of recession, which we're probably already in mathematically, it's human behavior to kind of go right back down to the base of the pyramid. And then over time, we're going to work our way up again. And it repeats over and over. And so there's a lot of industries that work at that base of the pyramid. And if you're in one of these industries, you're probably having a great month and a great quarter if you serve these businesses. And there's too many to list. But there are a lot of businesses that are doing a lot of business right now. Healthcare is a great example. Mortgage refinancing, online education, home repair. The list is endless. If you're not in one of these, it's going to be a turbulent time. And that's really what we're going to focus on tonight. But the point is that it's a migration. It's a shift. Where you need to think about is, where does your business fall on that pyramid? So are you near the top? You're kind of a nice to have. You make people feel good. Or are you selling toilet paper, in which case your job is safe and your company is safe, right? And every piece of the spectrum in between. So the way I would encourage you to think about it is, are you selling a medicine or a vitamin? A medicine is something your customers must have to survive. If you're selling a vitamin, it's a nice to have. It's something I can cut. It's something I can do without. And you got to be really honest with yourself now about your business. So type in the chat box. If your company basically sells medicine, your customers cannot do business and live without it, whether they are consumers or B2B, or type vitamin if it's a nice to have. It's dispensable, disposable. And then we'll keep going from there. Okay, so most people are starting to enter vitamin or medicine. And I see about half and half so far, roughly half and half. Some are a combination. Some of you maybe are investors and you have a bunch of different companies. Some are both. But it's important to be honest with yourself because the market's about to tell you. You're about to find out. So where do you start once you've really been honest with yourself about that? You got to start with your cash position, your balance sheet. There's a great expression amongst investors that during good times, like we've just had for 12 years, you really focus on your income statement, revenues, profitability, growth. Yay, it's great, it's fun. During times like this, the recessionary period, when the business and the industry contracts, you got to focus on your balance sheet and primarily your cash position and know your burn rate. And what's amazing to me as I talk to business leaders is they don't really know their burn rate. They know it approximately. I'm talking about knowing it every day from here until we get through this period, because it may come down to something that close. And over the next hour, I'm going to share with you ways to extend that runway to reduce your burn rate. But you got to know where it starts. And if you don't, it's pretty tough to make decisions. As you think about that, you're going to prepare for the worst situation. And if, God bless, we're in better shape than that, you're going to be fine. What you don't want is the opposite. This is a framework that a lot of venture capital firms use with their companies. And I'm going to encourage you to do something like this exercise. We're not going to do it right now on this call. Happy to talk to you about it offline if you want. But basically, you think about a number of scenarios. You think about the things outside your control. It could get this bad, it could get this bad, or it could get this bad. And then you think about the things in your control, either revenue growth or cost reductions, how much runway you want to make, a runway you want to create. And by the way, that's not just for unprofitable venture-backed companies, that's every company. If you're a big company and you have a dividend you want to keep paying, if you're at a mid-sized company where you're kind of marginally profitable, but you got some big expenses coming up, and you think about the plan, your plan A, your plan B, and your plan C, and then it's just a matter of doing the math. It's not that complex. We're going to give you some examples now. So the most common question I've been asked in the past 10 days by CEOs and business leaders has been, what assumption would I encourage them to make? And this is a default assumption because some of you, your businesses are growing and booming right now, although it's still wartime, so don't get deceived. For other companies like restaurants or hotels, you have to assume your revenue is going to be down 99% or 100%. But if you don't know any better, and if you're like many companies, I would encourage you to think about a significant revenue decline. Is that 30, 40, 50%? It depends on your situation. And then for how long, right? Your business may be able to withstand a 40% reduction in revenue for the next month. But what happens if the lockdown doesn't end in a month? Or what happens if it does, but the customers don't come rushing back in the street for a parade as we've been promised? So you got to think about, what assumptions do you want to make for your business? If you don't start there, you can't manage your cash accordingly and your business accordingly. And that comes down to your risk profile. I don't like to take risks, so I want to plan for the worst and hopefully do better than that. Others want to play it closer to the edge. Others want to roll the dice and hope that this virus recedes as the temperature gets warmer or whatever. It's really up to you. But you got to ask yourself, what is your risk profile, the risk profile of your investors, and are you going to bet your employees' professions and jobs if you're wrong? So don't just think about yourself. You got to think about all your constituents. It's time for you to be a wartime leader. That's what this session is all about. Now, wartime leader is a totally different animal. It's probably very different than the style that you've used, because the natural inclination, and as a CEO, I work with, or as a headhunter, I work with a lot of CEOs, and the typical style that develops is a very consensus building CEO. I see it across industries, both genders, ages, consensus building. It's a very comfortable, natural style. There are certainly wartime leaders out there. That's their natural style. There aren't many. They're going to do really well right now. The problem is you may not be one of them, and you still got a business to run or a department to run. And guess what? You're going to fake it till you make it. You're going to appoint yourself as a wartime leader with that one priority, which is living to fight another day. That's all that matters. It's about taking action and not trying to be perfect, not waiting for perfect information, 80-20. And it's about being a little bit paranoid that the worst is going to happen, but not turning that into paralysis. Okay. Very different styles. So let me kind of show you what I mean. So if you're a consensus builder, you probably think about your company's culture first. And it pains me to say this because, I wrote the book on this, right? Chapter 2, that's all it's about. And it's all I talk about in the class I teach at Kellogg and my content, everything. Focusing on getting everyone on board and getting everyone on the tent and, go slow to go fast. That's consensus building. It works really well in peacetime conditions. It builds a culture. It builds a company. It scales. It can be replicated. The problem is we are now in wartime. And if you don't believe that, I would say you will believe that in the next 10 days. On both the health crisis front and the economic crisis front. Because if you believe what we're told, in 2 weeks, we're going to see the most awful things that we've seen perhaps in our lifetime. So getting ahead of it and understanding what a command and control or wartime leader looks like, it's focusing on survival, not just physical survival, but the survival of your business. And of course, your company's core values guide your decisions, of course. But you're optimizing for survival. You're not optimizing for culture. You would make a different set of decisions. You're going to be micromanaging things that you never used to micromanage. I'm a recovering micromanager. I teach people how not to micromanage, how not to babysit, how to let go. During this time period, which may be a month or a quarter or a year, you will be micromanaging things. And by the way, you'll be letting go of other things that you used to spend your time on. You might have been the idea creative guy and you never spent time on cash collections. But guess what? You're going to get to know Rhonda, who's your accounts receivable clerk, really well, because you're going to want to know every check that comes in and when it comes in. And it may matter by hours or days. I've seen this before. There can't be deviations to the plan. You're going to make decisions without perfect information. You're even going to break some glass, and that's going to feel very uncomfortable if you're a consensus builder. You're going to piss some people off. Some people in your organization are going to piss others off, all to one goal, which is survival of the business. Now, you have to have confidence that you've hired well and that your company has a strong DNA. It will flex. It won't break. It hasn't been tested like it's about to be tested, but you have to have confidence that you've done those things well. And part of that means asking for forgiveness, not permission. Both you of your team and your team of you and them of each other. We got to get shit done. And that means we're not going to have time for the long hugs and the meetings and circling back to make sure everyone's on board. That takes a lot of time that we don't have right now. So I'm talking about a wholesale shift of your leadership style from consensus builder to command and control wartime leader. Now, I'm going to take you through how to do that, how to communicate it, some of the decisions you're going to need to make. But first, I want to know if you think you're up for this. Type in the chat box, yes, if you believe you can make that shift. And I mean tomorrow, if you haven't already done it. Type no if you're not sure. You can be really honest. No one's going to see your chat, your comments. Yes, you can make that pivot. No, you can't. And by the way, you'll be able to switch back. This is not a one-time change. Your leadership style needs to change and flex. I promise you can go back to being a consensus builder and a hugger during peacetime. We're going to get there. But if the answer is no, and there's quite a few of them, you really got to think about, are you the right person to be leading things right now? And we'll talk about that too. Okay, let's move on. Here's why leaders don't adjust their style. I've seen many consensus builders who can't make the transition during these recessionary periods. They believe that it's one size fits all. They believe, well, that's just my leadership style. I'm a consensus builder. You know, they get asked in job interviews, what's your leadership style? Oh, I'm a consensus builder. The problem is, it's okay to flex. A leadership style can change based on the situation. It doesn't happen often, but this is one of those times. And these folks are afraid of pissing people off. They're afraid of upsetting their staff. They're afraid of making the tough decisions. Maybe you worked for someone who was one of these wartime leaders, these command and control types during peacetime. And you thought, I never want to be like that jerk. Well, guess what? That jerk right now is going to save your life. And you're going to be that jerk. And by jerk, what I mean is, you're not going to be disrespectful. You're not going to be unempathetic, but you're going to be decisive and take action and behave in a way that is different than how you behaved in the past. You may be worried, will they forgive me? Will my people still like me? Your people will like you if you get the business through this time period. It doesn't matter at all if the business doesn't survive. It ain't going to matter. These are not your friends. These are your people who have entrusted their career to you, their livelihood to you. Your commitment is to steer through this rocky waters, which is not going to be a month or a couple weeks. Now, when you make this change, you can't just change. You need to tell your team that you are going to be practicing a different type of leadership for the foreseeable future. Educate them, explain that to them. I'll send you this information. You can share it with them. Explain why you're using a different style. Now, you may use slightly different language than we're going to use here tonight. It may be less blunt and less onerous, but reassure them that you're doing it for the good of the business. You're not mad at them. They didn't cause this problem, but you are the leader of your company or your department or your investment fund. And the reason I feel comfortable saying that is you are going to get the biggest hall pass of all time in the future for the leaders who navigate this storm. Your people will forgive you. Your investors will forgive you. Your vendors and customers will forgive you if you get through this storm, which I would argue means survive in one piece. Now, we're going to have to make some tough decisions to figure out how to do that. And some of those decisions are, first, can you be that wartime leader? And a few of you said, no, I'm not sure. That's the first question you need to answer. And if you can't, you may have a COO that you can turn to, a CFO, some other person that you put in charge for this period of time. Give them a battlefield promotion. That's totally okay. In fact, that's the best thing you can do as a leader, is to realize I'm the wrong leader for this situation. I don't want to do it. I can't make these changes. I can't make these reductions. Someone has to ensure the survival of the business. And if it's not you, you should appoint that person tomorrow. Next question to make is, what assumptions do you want to make, right? I showed you kind of my assumption. You may be more conservative than me. Maybe you think I'm neurotic. Maybe you think 40%, our business will never go down 40%. Maybe you're in telehealth where your business is booming. I mean, Zoom can barely keep this thing up and running, right? What changes are you going to make, and when are you going to make them? And by the way, the answer is now. And what opportunities can we seize on? It's not all downside. There's actually some real upside here too. So there's a lot of questions to be answered. Now, we're not going to cover them all in huge depth, but I at least want to frame them for you during this session. Type in the chat box if that would be useful on kind of how to think about this and how to go about this process. Type yes if you're on board and you think that would be helpful to you. Okay, a lot of yeses. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so let's keep rolling. A lot of what we're going to be talking about are difficult decisions to make cuts and reductions. There are certainly upside opportunities. I'm going to put those second, but it's pretty hard to envision scenarios unless you're in one of these few industries: healthcare, telehealth, medicine, selling face masks, right? These certain industries that are excluded, you're going to be cutting. And as I've led businesses through 3 recessions, what I can tell you in this fourth is, first question is, how do we cut the fat? Now, you should already cut the fat, so you're not going to get a lot of credit for that. But that's like the easy part. We're probably going to cut into muscle. Muscle means operating parts of the business that we really value and need, and perhaps some people. And it's very possible this time will be deep enough that we actually need to cut into bone, meaning we're going to cut off the limb to salvage the rest of the body. I know those are harsh analogies, but what I saw in 2001 was that I had to cut into muscle. In 2008, it was so deep and prolonged in my particular sector, we had to cut into bone, which is very painful, but it was either that or nothing survives. So you'll need to think about how you treat those decisions, those layers. There's a lot of choices to make. One of the first ones is, who and what must you absolutely keep? Make a list of the people first that you must absolutely keep. They are the epitome of your business. There is no company without them. And by the way, it's not just your senior team, and it's not just your top sales guy. It's the people who are the life and blood of your company. And you start with that list. And you bring them into your circle of trust. You tell them. Because you have to remember, just because you consider them untouchable, they don't know that. They see the stuff on TV. They hear about the unemployment rate. They hear about layoffs. Their spouse has just been laid off. Their kid has a sniffle. They're not sleeping. And they're worried that they're not on that list. So if they are, tell them. Lock them in. I'm not saying give them a raise. Maybe. But what I am empowering you to do is, or imploring you to do, is tell them. That might mean giving battlefield promotions to people. which means for this foreseeable future, Sally, I want you to run this and this, right? It's like being in Vegas and placing your bets on the wheel. Who are you going to pick as the backbone of the company during this time period? Not just people, but processes or products, things that are just not touchable. Make sure you write them down. The way that I would recommend doing that is what I call zero-based budgeting. Now, what a lot of leaders do is they'll talk to their CFO and they'll get a printout of the P&L from last quarter or last year, and they'll start cutting things. They'll say, well, we don't really need to do this. I can cut 20% of this. I'll cut 10% of that. And they kind of find a way to get to some number. What I usually find when you do that is you don't cut deep enough. It's not significant enough. And you're just kind of moving deck chairs on the Titanic. A far more pure way to approach this is a zero-based budget, which basically means you start with a blank piece of paper and you build it from the bottom up. So if I was starting this company today or starting this department today, what would I need? If I could go to an island, I could only bring a few things. What would I bring, right? So it's these people, it's this resource, it's this process, it's this vendor, the non-negotiable, and you build it back up. And you really ask yourself those tough questions. Do I really need this? Do we really need this? Do we have to have this right now? And start that way. If you start with that blank piece of paper and you envision it that way, you'll make clear, more focused decisions than if you get the printout from last quarter and you have to mark it up. What generally you're going to find is most vital in those decisions are three things: the makers and the shakers. So makers are people that deliver the service, that make the product. Shakers are the people that sell, that keep the revenue coming in. And then cash collections, anything in that whole process. These three are your oxygen. And so just like you wouldn't fly in a plane without oxygen masks, you're not going to fly without these three things. And these may be 90% of your company, maybe 100% of your company, probably not. It may be 20% of your company, but that's the first place to start. What kind of things can you talk about reducing? Hopefully, you've already begun this exercise. It's now, 20 days into this thing. So if you haven't done the easy stuff, let's start there. There's a lot of employee benefits, not your significant healthcare coverage for your team, but all kinds of employee benefits that nobody uses. They should go. There's a lot of software and tools that your team has not logged into in 6 months. Those should go. There are contracts for vendor after vendor that you work with. Those should be renegotiated. You're finding a lot of companies right now who are very flexible on stretching payments out, on giving more terms, on reducing prices. We're going to talk about this from the other side of the fence in a little bit. Getting rid of any customer that is not a profitable customer. And that takes some soul searching, but what you're going to find is when you really think about the variable cost that it takes to deliver your service or your product, that there are some customers that, frankly, you're not really making money on. And you kept them because it was revenue. You were measured by revenue. This is not about revenue anymore. This is about the balance sheet. They have to go. And then finally, pushing out your payments with key vendors. So that goes back to renegotiating. So this is the easy stuff, and we're about to get harder in a moment. The hard stuff. Think about whether you need that new product. That product that you've been working on that's going to launch in 2 years, this may not be the right time to continue working on that product. In fact, any project that was long-term, and I would say right now, long-term is 6 months, may have to go on the back burner or may have to go off the burner completely. In terms of marketing, I am not telling you to stop marketing, because when you stop marketing, you're going to choke your funnel and your pipeline. And as soon as you get 2 months, 3 months, 6 months down the road, you're going to have no revenue. So you're right back where we started from. What I will say, however, is anything you're spending on marketing that is brand related should be redeployed to direct response marketing, which you probably should have done anyway, but should be focused on email marketing and search engine marketing marketing and advertising that brings in leads and fills that pipeline immediately. That's the place to spend on marketing. Other things, real estate. Can you sell any property? Do you have any equipment you don't need? Do you have any receivables you can factor or sell? Go through everything. That's the hard stuff, right? We did the easy stuff, the stuff no one's using. This is harder stuff, right? I know that you have this dream product you've been working on. I know that you love your brand advertising campaign. I know you don't want to sell your receivables at 50 cents on the dollar, but maybe you should get that cash now. And this is the hard stuff. Now we're going to go to the hardest stuff, which, as you would expect, is probably your biggest line item of investment, which is your people. Now, there's a lot of different choices here, but they basically boil down into 3 buckets. And I'm not going to tell you which bucket to pick or which option to pick because every situation is different. I would need to know more about your situation, but I can give you the 3 choices. Choice 1, reduce a certain percentage of your headcount, 5%, 50%, whatever the number is. That's certainly an option. It started 2 weeks ago. There's 10 million new unemployed people. Their companies chose those options. Now, many of those companies were restaurants, hotels, airlines. They didn't have a choice. It was the first choice. You have a choice. That's one of them. Second choice, keep your team intact. Keep the band together, but reduce your total compensation by a meaningful amount to extend your cash runway. Even if you're already profitable, I'm not just talking about venture-funded, unprofitable companies. You could be profitable, a going entity. I don't care if you're 50 years old, but if you see your revenue coming 40% down for the next 12 months, how much do you need to cut compensation by to survive that? And what you'll generally want to think about is a certain percentage for your top team and yourself, some smaller percentage for your mid-team, and some very small percentage, but not zero, for entry level. The problem is, at the lowest level, individual contributors is only so much that you can reduce their comp by, right? Many of them live hand to mouth anyway. So it's not an equal peanut butter, we're all going to take a 20% haircut. You want to think about how to make it proportionate by tier. The third option, which some of my clients are doing, is they're releasing their employees to a furlough status, which basically means they're keeping them on the roster, but they're giving them unpaid time off. So no pay, but they are continuing to pay for their benefits, their healthcare benefits, which is pretty noble right now, obviously. But with the new governmental benefits program, those people can actually receive unemployment benefits. So this may be a hybrid structure. The thing to remember, though, is that government program is only 8 or 10 weeks long. And so if you're not a betting man or woman and you think that this time period is going to be longer, then that ain't going to cut it. You also want to think about how to keep them engaged, because the whole goal of putting them on furlough is to bring them back as soon as business comes back. So how are you going to engage with them and communicate with them? And you also need to think about when you're going to make it permanent. Decide that now, not later. Say, you know what, if this keeps going 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 6 months, we're going to have to let them go. So look, you got 3 options. I'm happy to talk to you and work with you to figure out which of the options you want to pick. But there aren't many more than that when it comes to people. And that, for many businesses, is where you're going to find enough capital to free up to fund this time period. So how do you make those decisions? You need to decide how long you think this period is going to last. And by the way, it's going to last different lengths for different industries. So even when we are freed from captivity in 30 days, I don't think people are going to be rushing back to restaurants. So restaurants may be one of the last things to recover. Las Vegas will probably be the last thing to recover, maybe cruise ships. Other things might recover sooner, right? I think haircuts are going to do really well as soon as we can get out. But I think restaurants are going to be slower. So you got to decide for yourself how long your industry is going to take, and then how fast do you think it's going to bounce back? Are we going to be in a V-shaped recovery, a U-shaped recovery? How are your employees going to fare through those three choices. You know how strong they are. You know morale. You know how important it is to keep the band together. How are you going to share the pain? There's going to be pain any way you look at it. How are you going to divide up that pain? So let's talk about what that looks like at a very practical level. I've hired 3,000 people over the course of my time. I've also released or laid off or furloughed people as well. What I can tell you is only what I've learned from doing that. The most cruel thing that you can do, and the most selfish thing you can do as a leader, especially a wartime leader, is to wait and wait and wait until we are far into the recessionary period that I think we've already entered, and then realize, oh, we need to lay people off. At that point in time in the cycle, your people will have a very, very difficult time finding a new position at a new company. Very few people are going to be hiring. The ones that are hiring will have a choice from any candidate they want. It's just supply and demand. So if you are one of the first companies to do this, you will actually be giving your people the best chance for them to find a role. It kind of comes down to whether you want to be selfish and gamble with their career and their livelihood and their ability to feed their family. I'm being blunt and direct. A lot of leaders wait because they're worried about how the press is going to cover it, how the trade magazine is going to report it, what they might say about me on Glassdoor. This is not the time to worry about industry optics. I'm assuring you that years from now, when people look back at this period, you will have had the most amazing air cover you've ever had for making these very difficult decisions and very difficult cuts. So don't worry about being the first guy. Worry about being the last guy, because that's going to be tough. Obviously, focus on employees that are not profitable on the margin. Now, there's different ways to calculate that. I'm happy to show you the ways. But in one case where I released, salespeople were costing about $100,000 a year. And when we were really honest about calculating it and how much revenue they needed to bring in just to cover their cost, it was a significant multiple. It's like $300,000, $400,000 when you added all their variable costs and everything else. So you got to think about who's profitable and not profitable on the margin. And if they're not profitable, if they're burning net cash for your business, you really need to think about that first. Give them severance if you can, if at all possible. 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever you can do. Give them a laptop. And most importantly, don't just give them money, but give them help. And the help you can give them is by converting your HR and recruiting department into a makeshift outplacement agency. An outplacement firm is a company that helps people find jobs and introduces them to other people. I've gotten about, 10 emails from CEOs here in Chicago this week, and they've made cuts and they've listed out everyone, and these people are great at this, and here's my sales team, and they're introducing them to me, hoping that I can introduce them to others. Spend that time. Have your head of HR, your recruiters do that. It's essentially recruiting in reverse. Okay. I just want to make sure you're with me. Type in the chat box yes if you're still with me, if you're finding this useful and practical. I promised it would be straight, and I'm trying to give it to you straight as I know how, because I think you'll have a huge advantage over people that wait too long to make these decisions. So just type in the chat box yes if you're still with me. Okay, a lot of yeses. So now let's go deeper. I have unfortunately been in situations where I had to release people, lay them off, right-size the organization, whatever you want to call it. And I can promise you with every bone in my body that cutting deep once is so much better than doing it layer by layer by layer. So build your assumptions and assume the worst case scenario that you can come up with, because I can assure you it's probably going to be accurate. It's far more likely that you still were not aggressive enough, then, oh my God, we cut too many people. I just never see it happen. In 3 recessions, I just never see it happen. The problem with death by 1,000 cuts, and I did this in 2001 where I did 6 rounds of layoffs over, 6 months. By the time we got towards the end of that period, no one was working. They were all looking over their shoulder, looking for jobs, worried about being the last rat on the ship. So you get 0 productivity, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Measure twice, cut once. Measure 10 times, cut once. Now, there's another way, which is combining roles. So things still have to get done. Don't forget that you might be able to combine your head of sales and head of marketing into one role. Your head of marketing and head of operations. I've seen that done a lot. Or head of finance and operations. So think about the people on your team that can step up with a battlefield promotion, and many of them will surprise you. And that's another way to reduce your burn rate. The bottom line on right sizing, and then we're going to move on to some other topics, is the number is probably more than you think. The time to do it is now. I mean, next week, like Monday. Don't wait till Friday, 5 o'clock. And which ones, steer towards the makers and the shakers and the cash machine. That goes on one piece of paper. Everything else goes on the other piece of paper until you make those numbers work based on the assumptions that you're using. Now, when it comes time to execute this, to give people notice, to lay them off, let me give you a little bit of candid coaching on how to do that, because I've done this before. And it's the worst part about business. There have been times that I threw up, the morning of, but you still have to do it. Guess what? You're the leader. You wanted to run the department. You wanted to be the CEO. You wanted to be the investor. Guess what? Now you're the leader, and this is what we have to do. Do not wait. The day doesn't matter. The time doesn't matter. That's all noise. I've read every study. It doesn't matter. You're not more likely to have suicide on certain days. It's all noise. The sooner you do it, the kinder you are being to the inevitable people that are impacted. As hard as it is for me to say this, you must do it via Zoom video. You can't do it via email. You can't do it via voicemail. You can't do it via Slack. You can't do it via FedEx. You owe them. You owe your people, the ones who have been so loyal and so committed to the cause, for them to look in the whites of your eyes and see that it pains you as much as you say. And they better believe it, because they're never going to forget that day. Now, they're not going to like anything you say. In fact, it's a pretty short meeting. It's 5 minutes. As soon as you tell them, they're not going to hear anything else you say. Also, don't expect any more productivity or workout out of your folks that are on that call. You can do it one at a time. If it's a small team, you can do it all at once if it's a big group. But word's going to spread like wildfire. So think about the communication plan. And then once they've been notified, and of course, there are technology things you need to think about, turning off their email access and revoking passwords and all those unpleasant discussions. Have all that thought through ahead of time. Certainly have HR follow up with them individually, one at a time, no matter how long that takes, day or night, weekends, whatever it takes to follow up with each one individually. Look, this is ridiculously painful. I'm not telling you have to lay people off. I'm not telling you when or how many. That's not my job to impose that on you. What I'm imploring you to do is think about the new normal, the new assumptions you want to make, and your cash, and how do you want to take action? And if it comes to this, then these are the steps that you take. Now, at the same time, it's vitally important to speak with the survivors, the people who are staying. They're going to be shell-shocked as well in a different way. Set up a Zoom video so they can see you. You don't need to show all of them so that all their faces are showing. It's got to be the same day. And you're talking about, now, normally you would do this in a physical office, right? You'd have them gather around and you'd get some pizzas and you'd explain it. You know what? If you're going to do this in this next 4, 6, 10 weeks, it's going to be via video. And explaining your decision, your rationale, how difficult it was, And importantly, not making any promises. Do not, as I did once when I was 26, say, this is our last cuts. We won't need to make any more cuts. You're all safe. Please don't say those words. It's so easy for them to come out of your mouth, especially when you ask for questions and that new kid who just started his business career says, I have a question. Do you think we may have to make more cuts? It's so easy to say, I don't think so. Don't make promises that you may not be able to keep. The best answer to that is I've cut really deep to make sure that we don't have to revisit this again. Make sure you take the time to review your key priorities with these people. The world has changed so much in 20 days that if you have even more than 50 employees, I can guarantee you there are people in your company that still are not with the program. They still don't understand that we have a totally different set of priorities. They've all changed. I would also explain the cuts that you've taken, that your leadership team has taken, so that people understand you are sharing the pain. So don't forget the survivors. Obviously focus D-Day and your decision on the people that are directly impacted, but you still are doing that and making those changes and being empathetic early so they can find a job, so that you can protect the survivors and keep the band together. Have that communication. Type in the chat box if this makes sense so far. While you're doing that, I'm doing a time check. So it's 5 till the hour. I've got quite a bit more content to cover. I apologize that it's not going to be an hour, but I spent the past 2 days putting this together, and I think it's really useful stuff. So if you can stay, great. If you can't, I understand. It's not going to be that much longer, but it is going to be a little bit after the hour. So I just wanted to share that with you. It is so much better to rip the Band-Aid off now. You have, as a leader, the biggest air cover you're ever going to have in your career. You have the biggest healthcare crisis this country's ever known, potentially. You have the biggest economic crisis this country's ever known, potentially. It's important to level with your people now. Bonuses, not going to happen. I've talked to people that are like, oh, I'm staying with my company because I'm going to get this bonus at the end of the year. And I'm like, that's a big assumption. I don't think your company is going to exist at the end of the year. Make it clear that their pet project is going to the back burner and you still love them and their pet project, but you need them to focus on this right now. So have these candid discussions. It's all about candor. You're to find out who you can count on, who can roll with the punches, who's resourceful, and who's action-oriented, and who, sadly, hunkers down and can't deal with it. You're about to find out because they have not been tested as they are about to. It's vital that you set expectations with your team, your direct team, whoever that is, that you expect them to step up and serve as wartime leaders as well. So everything we've been talking about, not being consensus-driven, taking action, reducing costs, etc., you expect the same from them, and so on and so forth. I think the way to do that, which I've used, is don't bring me a problem unless you're also bringing me a solution. Really push your people now to help be part of the solution, not the problem. Some other ideas on compensation, how to reduce that burn rate, even potentially without layoffs. Shifting any fixed compensation to upside variable compensation. So in one situation where I led a sales team, we reduced all their base salaries, but we increased the variable comp. So the people that still did well, actually some did better. Some made more money under that new structure. They were thrilled. The bottom performers obviously didn't. They took the biggest hit. Some of them left. We parted ways with some. So you can make that shift. And it's not just in sales. Operations, anything that's metrics driven where you can measure it, that can work really well. Collections. I had a collections team and we put a short-term collections incentive program in place. And it's amazing how they became a lot tighter about collections and getting cash in, and your cash is oxygen. There may be other employees that you have that you can shift to contract status. So maybe you still need them, but you don't need them full-time, or you don't know exactly how much you're going to need them. So you say, look, I can't keep you on the books, but I still love your work and want your work. I'm going to let you go take some other clients. I still want to be your favorite client, your first priority client, but pay them on an hourly or usage basis. Bring that fixed cost and make it more variable cost. Throughout this process, the three people you're going to rely heavily on are your person who crunches all the numbers. There's a lot of numbers to crunch really fast. That should not be you. It should be your CFO or your best financial analyst, as long as they have discretion and maturity to handle these kinds of very difficult discussions. Your head of talent or HR, if you are a small company and you work with a PEO, an employment attorney, keep them by your side so you're making well-informed decisions that are in the scope of the law, and you'll keep yourself out of trouble. I'm going to shift away from people and talk about pricing. This is the optimal time, if you haven't done recently, to review your pricing strategy, to really think about whether it's still even relevant in this new world. In some cases, you may actually want to reduce your price if you are convinced it's going to drive volume and drive it in the short term. So if you're in a sector where everyone's dropping their price, you may need to drop your price. But if you're not convinced that it's going to drive volume, then you hold fast. So revisit it at least. In other sectors, you may actually want to be raising your price. If you're selling something, maybe your time, that's in very short supply. Now, I'm not encouraging you to gouge. Not only is it illegal during health crises, but it's the most unethical thing you could do, and your customers will remember it. But there may be products or services that you consider raising your price or grandfathering in some of your current customers, but for new customers, you raise your price. So if you haven't revisited your pricing in the past 20 days, it's time to do that. You may actually want to reduce your price in exchange for more of their volume. So they're going to come to you, your customers, over the next 20 days, especially if they're on this webinar, and they're going to say, hey, Bob, I need you to work with me. I can't pay $10. I need to pay $8. You say, well, I hear you. I'll do $8, but I want you to commit to me that you're going to give us more of your business. And if they can't give it to you in the near term, maybe it's long term. If they can't even put a contract together because it's going to take 30 days, a handshake agreement, and you can't even shake their hand because you're on Zoom with them. So it's a morally binding agreement. And I believe most humans will live up to that. So review your pricing. That is the best way to drive your top line and keep the cash coming in while you're managing your expenses. Cash right now is your oxygen. Collections are vital. You're over this every day, twice a day if necessary. Give your customers discounts if they can pay right now. Set up a payment plan. I have a lot of clients that have significant accounts receivable. They're putting their customers on a payment plan every week, every month, whatever it is, whatever the customer can do. And for God's sakes, if you're convinced that one of your customers is not going to make it, and you should know this, you should know which of your customers have a balance sheet that's strong and what their cost structure is. And if you say, I don't see them making it through summer, then you need to cut them off. You need to part ways with them or tell them they need to pay in advance. Completely ethical and legal, and they will understand. And then they can make a tough decision on where you as their vendor fall on that spectrum. Now, before I go to some of the good news and opportunity, type in the chat box if you're still with me. Just type yes or yes, Jeff, or give me a wartime slogan, whatever you want to tell me. And then we're going to keep rolling. We are at the 1 hour mark, and I just have a few more things that I want to share with you before I open it up for questions. You cannot do this alone. You must do it with your team. Okay, here we go. There is opportunity in every crisis. There's opportunity. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And the way to do that is by thinking about what your customers and your clients need from you right now. You may not even know because you've been so hunkered down, focusing on working at home, getting the kids set up. You've been very internally focused. I can understand that. You need to turn yourself outwardly focused. I don't care what function you are. If you're in marketing, you better ask your internal customers, what do you need from us now? And the answer is probably going to be leads, sales. So you find a way to deliver it. If you're in sales, turn outside and ask your customers and clients. If you're the CEO, what do you need now? And then here's the thing. There's no time to develop some fancy pants piece of software or app that's going to take 3 months or 12 months. So ask yourself, what can you roll out next week? I know that sounds crazy. I'm going to give you a few ideas, but that's the question you should be asking. And by the way, include your team in that question. Say, guys, there's no limits. Anything is off limits. Nothing is off limits. We can do anything. What can we have up and running by next week? This is what the winners, the survivors are doing right now. I've rolled out a few of these in the past 3 days and have totally new revenue streams that I didn't even think about before. So they fall into 2 general categories. The first is consultative services or advisory services. That's your customers paying you for your time and expertise. Not by the hour necessarily, because you have real expertise. You got to think about, what do we know that no one else knows? Let me help you through this period. Let me help you through this uncertainty. You also have information. You have data that you probably haven't even thought about how to monetize it, because you see what all your customers are doing. Wouldn't your customers or maybe other people pay for that information? Anonymous, customized information. So as an example, there are people that sell data that show that things have fallen off a cliff in other sectors, or they're booming in other sectors. You have a purview that you haven't even thought about how to monetize that, and you can be a trusted advisor to your customers and clients. Hugely valuable. What can you charge for that service? The second example are outsourced services. What stuff, even if it's shit work, can you take off their plate so they can focus on their core? They will pay you because they're going to part ways potentially with people, but they'll pay you services to handle their overflow, to handle it, to take it off their plate until this storm passes. Don't be beneath that. And by outsourced services, I'm not talking about taking on busy work or make work. I'm not talking about taking on unprofitable work. But if you have any excess capacity sitting around, which you shouldn't, but if you do, and you're like, you know what, we could provide this service, then launch it on Monday. Not perfectly. Don't wait for the website to be done, although that can be up and running in a matter of 3 hours. Get these up and running next week. Huge way to increase your revenue 5%, 10%, 20%. Every dollar is going to count over the next few months and quarters. Another huge opportunity is top grading your team. There are 10 more million people on the market. That's about to become 15, 20 million, sadly. This is the first time in 10 years that as a headhunter, I could tell you it's raining A players from the sky. It's no fault of their own. Companies that are releasing them are not releasing just their C players. They're letting everyone go. I'm in Chicago. Hyatt hotels are closed. Can you imagine the talent that is oozing out of Hyatt that some of my clients want to get their hands on? You can do the same thing. Anyone you've been thinking about top grading and you've been waiting too long, get those people, swap them out, make those changes now. Let's talk about communication. We've talked about a lot of changes, a lot of unpleasant decisions you need to make, a lot of assumptions you need to make. This is even harder because we're all separated physically. So the onus is on you to do an even better job communicating. And by that, I mean over communicating. Now, a lot of people think that means talking all the time and sending a million emails and lighting up Slack and lighting up their phone and stuff like that. It's not what I'm talking about. People can only absorb so much information. And if you overwhelm your people, you're going to freak them out. They will shut down. Instead, just the few key messages over and over and over. So the signal cuts through all the noise from CNN, all the health noise, all the deaths that we're going to hear about in the next few weeks, all the job worries, the few key messages over and over. And make sure that your team is doing the same with their team. Mandatory one-on-ones via Zoom video. Daily, weekly updates, the whole team together. Don't assume that everyone knows. If you're in a company with more than 50 people, I can promise you there are people that still haven't got with the program. It's your job to make sure that happens tomorrow. Being candid with them, just as I'm being candid with you, is the best way to do that. I know that's hard and it may be uncomfortable, but the more vulnerable you are as a leader, the more you will quickly tighten and build that trust amongst your team. If they know you're not full of shit, they're going to listen to you and fight for you and follow you into battle. So when you promise them the moon, everything's going to be okay, no more layoffs, peaches and cream, as soon as it doesn't happen, you're going to lose everything. So if you don't know, say, guys, I don't know, but here's what I'm doing. Here's how I'm deciding. Here's how I'm behaving. Here's how I'll communicate. Keep them close. Very hard to do via Zoom video, but you know what? That's what, as leaders, we have to do right now. You need to strike the right balance between what is right in front of their face that you need them to focus on, but giving them hope on what's going to be there on the other side of this. And what I see really smart leaders doing, if you're a CEO or if you're a department head, is saying, look, we're not going to make our bonus this year. We're lucky to have jobs. But in exchange, and because you're not going to be earning as much this year, this is going to be the greatest learning opportunity of your career. And explain to them, especially if they're younger, how much they're going to learn from this experience. Give them new assignments, battlefield promotions. Again, not bullshit work, but that's what candor is all about. Remind them that we're lucky. We have something. We've got a business. We've got profits. We've got jobs. Don't make promises that you can't keep. Now, I find the best leaders are getting into a cadence right now. And you might have been used to doing, monthly and quarterly and annual. All that is out the window. In a wartime situation, what I've done in all the recessions I've worked through is a daily and a weekly cadence. A daily stand-up meeting, 15 minutes, first thing in the morning. It gets people out of bed. It gets them out of their jammies. And it builds in accountability to get on Zoom. And we're going to talk for 15 minutes about the key priorities for the day and maybe a cup of coffee together. And then at the end of the day, some kind of wrap-up. It could be email. It could be a voicemail, whatever it is. And then each week through this period, which I believe will be months, maybe not homebound, but certainly business as not as usual. What were the accomplishments this week? Take pride. Look at the shit we got done this week. So people still feel good about that. What are our key priorities for next week? And then what are the oh shits or red flags that we need to get on like now, like this weekend? Get into some kind of cadence with your team now. It gives them a sense of normalcy, which people so desperately cling to during times of uncertainty. I can't promise your job is safe forever, but I can promise this regular communication, two-way communication. Get rid of, or at least consider getting rid of your website. I know that sounds crazy, but what I see companies doing, and I'm about to press the trigger on doing mine, is your website was built for peacetime. You should have a totally different message and approach, okay, with what your customers need right now. Blow it up. You can always go back to it, okay, but use it as an opportunity to change, to be the first. I guarantee your competitors haven't changed, or if they have, it's a little thing at the top. What you need to know we're doing for COVID. Oh, that's great. I'm talking about blowing it up, a wholesale change, throw it in the trash, and have it up and running in 48 hours on a WordPress site if you have to. Write it yourself if you have to. What your customers want and need from you right now. The storm is coming. I know it's going to be hard, and I know that's going to be uncomfortable, especially if it's your first time. Now, if you're one of the lucky ones, if your business is booming, don't forget it's still wartime conditions for your customers, for your vendors, perhaps for your employees, their families, their kid is sick, their husband just got laid off, or their wife is got a cough, whatever. Don't lose that empathy and don't get cocky. Also, don't get lax and don't let the business get fat. Don't overhire. These temptations will creep in. Well, she got laid off and we should hire her and put her on the payroll. That can turn against you real fast. Use this opportunity to top grade your team. It's a very rare time. Everyone is nervous. I understand that. A lot of people are paralyzed right now. I don't want you to fall into that trap, which is why I have an idea to share with you, which is to give you a bit of an unfair advantage if you found this useful. So type in the chat box if you found this useful and if you think that you're up to the challenge of doing these things, because I can assure you that a month from now or a quarter from now, if you look back, you're going to say, wow, that was a great use of time. And I'm really glad I started putting these things into practice, because now everyone's just starting to mobilize and do it. We're at an unemployment rate of 15%. None of my people can find a job. My customers are disappearing. The sooner you act, the better. So to give you a bit of an unfair advantage, I'm going to offer myself to you, not as an executive coach. That's the last thing you need right now, but as a wartime consigliere, just like in The Godfather, to give you the straight talk, to ask you the tough questions, and to hold you accountable. And I can serve that role. And I've crafted a product over the past week, and I've already got 10 clients doing it with me, and it's called War Plan. And basically in War Plan, we're going to have a one-on-one meeting, not a group meeting, just a one-on-one video meeting, just like this, you and me, for 90 minutes. And in 90 minutes, not my team, but with me, we're going to go through what assumptions you need to make for your business, how to set your priorities. We're going to have the tough discussion about how to right size your team. And we can do it in a few different scenarios. We'll figure out how you're going to communicate with your team. I'll give you the scripts and how to say it. I'll even practice with you on how to say the words so you can hear them coming out of your mouth. And then we'll put our heads together on some near-term ways to increase your revenue, to come up with some of those consultative advisory services. Okay, so we'll do all this. And in 90 minutes, what we won't do is wallow or, I'm not going to let you talk down. I won't deal with it. That's not the way I'm wired. I'm going to hold accountable. I'll also give you a recorded copy of the video so you can listen to it over and over, so you can get you don't have to scramble taking down all these notes. Okay. After our session and after I give you the video, I'm going to give you unlimited access to me for 90 days. So for a quarter, which I think is going to be the toughest quarter in your business career, you'll get unlimited access to me by email. And these emails, I've already got it set up in a filter. They are in red. And so I answer them first. And you're going to get no BS from me on anything you want to talk about, except wallowing. That's the only thing I won't do. Obviously, everything we discuss is confidential. I've been in executive search for 25 years. That's the nature of my business. I don't care if I know your team, your spouse, your investors, your VC. Everything we discuss is just you and me. I've got 10 clients I'm already doing this with, and I have room for 5 more. So 15 total. That's all I can handle at the moment. So it's just first come, first served. And that's kind of how I'm going to do it, to be fair. It's $19.97. It's $1,997, including the time with me, the 90-minute session and the video, and then unlimited access to me for any email question you want for what I believe is going to be the toughest quarter of your career. So is it worth $2,000? If I can help you make better decisions faster and then hold you accountable, I think it's kind of a no-brainer, but you'll have to decide. If you don't have me, then at least get someone to be that accountability buddy to push you on these tough questions so that you're making fast decisions. Some of these decisions you need to make by next week, and I'll meet with you as soon as I can, including over the weekend and evenings. I got nowhere to go. I'm at home just like you. If you're not sure if I can be helpful, just Google me and figure out if you think I can add some value. If not, I don't want to take your money. Okay? So either go it alone or get help. If it's not help from me, from one of your board members, one of your investors, but keep in mind that sometimes they have a different agenda than yours. So if you're the CEO of a business, and I have been the CEO of venture capital funded companies, I've been the CEO of private equity funded companies. Sometimes those needs diverge. There's a conflict of interests. And you got to think about whether the decisions you're making are in your best interest and or in your investor's best interest. I will be serving you and no other master. So if all that sounds helpful, here's how you sign up. I'm looking for 5 clients and then I'm done. And that's it. Headhunteredge.com/warplan. Headhunteredge.com/warplan. I'll keep it up until 5 people sign up, and then I'm pulling it down because 15 is all I can do. I think it's really helpful. But I know it's a lot of money. $2,000 is not chump change. So I'm happy to stay on now and answer as many questions as I can. So why don't you start typing them in the chat box, and I'll go through as many as I can. Obviously, it's not going to be personalized. It's not going to be, specific to your company, but I'll do my best to answer some of these now. So type in the chat box. I'm going to take a sip of water. Last night we stayed on for over an hour for Q&A. I'll stay on as long as you guys want. The first question was, this was really helpful. Can you send me a copy so I can share it with my team? Yes. I'm happy to send you the deck, the video, whatever you'd like. So type in the chat box other questions. And what do I get again for War Plan? Okay, so let me go back. Here's what you get. We're going to get 90-minute one-on-one, just the two of us. It's not a group meeting. It's not a group chat. It's you and me. I'm going to give you a framework that we're going to talk through together in real time. We're going to talk about your assumptions, your right-sizing strategy, your upside opportunities, and your contingency plans. It's going to be a fast-moving session. I'm going to video it. You're going to get a copy of it. Then for 90 days, we can talk it through. I'll answer any questions you've got. I'll hold you accountable. I'm going to ask you every day, every couple of days, how's it going? What's the latest? What can I help with? I can only do it with 15 people. Okay, next question. How bad do you think the economy is really going to get? It's a good question. I think my answer to that doesn't matter as much as your answer to that, because the assumptions you make on the inputs to your model and these decisions are your assumptions. If you're running a healthcare company right now, it's very different than if you're selling toilet paper right now versus if you have a SaaS company right now that is kind of a nice to have, right? Those are the assumptions that matter. What I am hearing as I read between the lines is we're looking at a protracted global depression, which is crazy to think about compared to where we were 20 days ago, that will affect a quarter of the workforce. And maybe not you personally. Maybe your job is safe. I think that's great. But a lot of people will be impacted, which means they won't be buying your company's product or service, which means you're going to have less revenue, which means you better look at your cost structure. So even if you're in one of those growth sectors, you have to ask that question. Next question. Any advice on mental health for the employees that we retain? Clearly, the outside world is distracting and makes people anxious. That's from Leanne. Thank you for asking that question. I actually had a slide on this and I pulled it because I didn't want you guys to think I was soft and squishy, but I do want to talk about mental health and physical health. Physical health is super important because many of your people on your team, they don't have a separation now of their work and their life and their kids. So they're not sleeping. They're not exercising. Their commute was the only exercise they ever got. They're stressed with their kids doing this e-learning. And my kids, I don't think are e-learning anything. So it's understandable that your physical health, the physical health of your people might be suffering right now. It's okay for you to ask them, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Are you taking care of yourself? Send me a picture of your workspace. And for God's sakes, give them $100 to go order a desk a chair, a comfortable chair on Amazon. Make sure that they're not succumbing to being on email 24 hours a day. Very easy to hunker down and do that. So that's the physical piece. Now, to Leanne's question about the mental health piece, yes, it's understandable to assume that some of your team are going to suffer from depression and anxiety and loneliness, especially extroverts. I find are having an especially tough time right now because they get their energy from other people. So when you separate and you're working from home, you don't have that reinforcement. There are amazing companies. Better Health is one of them, and there's a bunch of others that provide amazing online therapy. It's just like this. It's video. It's one-on-one. If you can pay for it as the employer, great. If it's copay, that's fine too. But the key is for you to enter the danger and have that discussion with your team. I would encourage you to have the discussion overall, just as I'm having with you, that between the economic crisis and the health crisis, some of us are going to succumb and have feelings that we haven't experienced before, and that I, as your manager, care about you and want to protect your mental health. And then one-on-one, if you are sensing that one of the people on your team is suffering from this, get them some help. Absolutely. It's not unfair to enter the danger and have that conversation. Let's go to the next question. Okay, next question. Can you talk a little about the legal exposure of layoffs and cuts? That's a good question. I said earlier that working closely with your head of HR and or an employment attorney are absolutely vital right now. They're worth every penny that you pay them. Employment attorneys, they're really busy right now. They could be $1,000 an hour or whatever. If it keeps you on the right side of the law, it's worth it. So I'm not an attorney. I've worked with many and many outstanding heads of HR. This is where they earn their pay, where they're really useful and provide great counsel. Don't let them make the decisions that we've talked about. Don't let them decide how many people I'm going to reduce, how I'm going to change my cost structure, etc. Don't let them make those decisions for you. That's your job. But how you execute, take cues from them on what to say, what not to say, severance structure, how to structure it, continued benefits, anything like that. You need to make sure you're basically, as long as you're consistent, you're fine. It's where people run into trouble, that they're inconsistent. So I cut a bunch of people this week and I gave them this severance because I felt like being generous. 2 weeks from now, I decide to cut more people. Again, this death by 1,000 cuts. But now I can't be as generous. So I'm going to give them a smaller severance. That is a trigger that will lead to lawsuits, complaints, and worse. It goes back to measuring twice and cutting once. Cut deep. Be as generous as you can within reason versus this trickling out. That's where you run into lawsuits and complaints. I know you can do this. You will be tested, I suspect, in the next months like you haven't before in your career. I know I am. My family is. Our children. But you're responsible not just for your family, but for the people on your team. And I can't help you with the family piece, but I hope this has been useful on the business piece. And I'm happy to work with you one-on-one. If you can't afford it, I totally understand. Find someone else who you can work with to make these tough decisions. And I wish you the best. Godspeed.